Eric's Epic Adventure.
All right, hello and welcome. We're so glad that you're joining us here on Facebook Live today for the culmination of Eric's Epic Adventure. I'd like to take the moment to introduce you the new president of the National Association of Elementary School Principals, Mr. Eric Cardwell. Eric, I'm so excited to be here with you today. My name is Gary Aboud. I'm the 2014 Michigan Teacher of the Year, and over the last couple of weeks, Eric has been traveling around the country, visiting about 28 different schools in 7 states, and traveling, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of miles?
About 4,400 right now.
Just a few miles, 4,400 miles around the country to see the great things happening in our schools around the country. And today we're here to hear all about that adventure. And so without much further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Today's event is brought to you by the National Association of Elementary School Principals and the Meemic Foundation. And we're so excited to have their support in schools around the country for the work that we're all doing as educators to support kids. And so without any further moving on, we're going to jump right into it. So Eric, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself? We're so appreciative that you did this journey and shared about it, and we'd like to hear a little bit about that today. But maybe tell us, where did this all get started?
So Gary, well, let me start off by just saying thank you to all the educators that are out there. Truly appreciative of all the work that you do on behalf of America's students. The genesis for this idea, Gary, really was, it started about 8 years ago when I served as president of the Michigan Principals Association, MEMSPA. And one of the things that I tried to do within the state was to do as much travel as possible, because getting into the schools and hearing their stories just provided information that we could use when we were looking at advocacy and better support of principals and teachers in the field.
Sure.
So when I was fortunate enough to be elected as president of our national association, I started thinking about, could we use that same model but apply it at a larger scale? And fortunately enough, we were able to partner with the Meemic Foundation. We're appreciative of their support, and we put together the tour schedule, and we went across 7 states, and right now, as you mentioned, 4,400 miles, and it's not done yet. We still have 2 more school stops to make, but it's about telling the story of schools, principals, teachers, communities. And it really, for me, in reflection, I knew this was going to be a fantastic event, but it really has touched me on a personal scale as well as a professional scale. And before we get into the specifics of the trip, I remember I was in Wisconsin shortly after the first day, and I was driving down the expressway, and I was reflecting on my visit to La Crosse schools, DeForest schools, and a couple of schools in the Upper Peninsula. And this might sound cliched, but it's not. Tears welled up in my eyes because I saw at the beginning of that trip just the impact that these communities were having on their kids, and just powerful, just powerful.
Yeah, and that's, I think, a really great point to keep in mind, that one of the things we get to see in traveling the country to visit schools is that impact goes well beyond the 4 walls of our own classrooms, of our own schools, and even of our own communities. And I know that I've had the opportunity as a Michigan Teacher of the Year to see a lot of different schools in action around the country as well as in our state. And I would just echo that sentiment, Eric, that it really is inspiring, and it does bring a lot of emotion to know the work that all of our educators like you are doing each and every day for our students. And I think one of the things that I'm interested to hear about are maybe what are some of the highlights that you saw of those inspiring moments as you travel?
Wow. Well, Dr. Cynthia Hammond, she's a principal in Warren Robins School District in Georgia. And her story, she did not follow the traditional path of the principalship. She actually served as a law enforcement officer. And her story, just absolutely incredible. The moment that she decided she wanted to work with kids, she had responded to a call at a house. There were, I believe, 3 children under the age of 7. and they were left unattended. The mother went away for a couple of days. And she said that after she had taken care of the situation, she went back down into her police cruiser and she started to cry. And she told me that Michael Jackson's song, Man in the Mirror, started to play on the radio. And at that point, she decided that she wanted to be a foster mom and that she wanted to serve on the front end rather than on the back end and go back, become a principal, to serve kids that did not have a voice. Tremendously powerful. And so at her school, Westside Elementary, high poverty. But one of the things that she does that is just absolutely astounding, Gary, is that the kids have a garden. They built STEM into their curriculum.
Okay.
And these children raise plants outside. They also have hydroponics inside. And these children raise the plants. They give a portion to their cafeteria to help feed the students.
Really?
But because it's an impoverished area, they also donate some of that food back to the local food banks to be given out to those that are in need.
So they're creating gardens that are producing actual produce that is going to people who can actually then go and consume it.
Correct. Powerful, absolutely powerful story. One of the other stories that I saw while I was on the road is Dr. Suzanne Marsh. She's a principal in Indiana, and one of her students has a mitochondrial disease and is in a wheelchair. And while I was there, the student happened to be out in the hallway, and they explained how their school family has come together, and the student has taken initiative to fundraise to try to help to find a cure.
Really?
And the school community has just enveloped her and rallied behind her to help support her cause to find a cure. So all of these stories that I came across, it came down to culture, relationships, building that school community that was so powerful.
That's really terrific. And you know, I think one of the themes that I've noticed in reading about your journey, and I'm sure many of our listeners today have probably noticed as well if they've been following along, is that there are a number of schools you visited that have community partnerships to both enhance the learning opportunities in school for kids, but also to be able to have a two-way giving back opportunity for those communities and those schools. Could you maybe share a little bit about some of the other maybe programs or some of the other things that you saw where schools and their community partnerships were really strong?
Well, you know, there was Upson Lee School District, which was in Georgia, and getting back to it's a partnership with the community, but it's also a relationship. Upson Lee, as I visited with their superintendent and their principal, has fallen under some difficult times.
Okay.
We realize the situations that has occurred in the United States as manufacturing jobs have moved overseas, and Upson Lee area was textile. And so the superintendent shared with me that they're really searching for a school identity, a point of pride, and that district, along with some of the programming that they've had, also embraced the athletic program at the school. Back-to-back state championships, and saw the community that was kind of reeling from economic issues to being focused and having a point of pride. So that really helped as well. But one of the partnerships that comes to mind. So it was really interesting. So my first school that I visited was 225 students, 265, excuse me, K-12, small school district. A week later, I was outside of Memphis with 165,000 students, K-12. But the interesting part in talking about partnerships, at Lachenal Community Schools, they're working on CTE programming, 265 kids, K-12, but with a boat building school where the students would be able to go into this boat school, learn small engine repair, learn the skills necessary, because part of the issue that I heard from schools was that there aren't jobs, we need to find jobs, so those students that want to stay in the area can.
Yeah.
And that boat building school provides that opportunity for some of those students in the rural Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
And that's a really innovative solution to what is probably a common problem that many of our viewers would see in their own areas, that there are a lot of people who are interested to stay in their communities, but the job opportunities often do take them elsewhere. And so it's terrific to hear that they're taking advantage of those opportunities within the local area as well, but not just doing them after school, but bringing them into the school to start that.
Absolutely.
So I heard you mention that you were in Georgia, and one of the things I read that was going on there as well is there was a school, I believe, that was inside the University of Georgia. Is that correct?
That's correct, Barrow Elementary.
What was that like to see a school situated inside of a university setting like that? I bet that had to be pretty unique.
Well, you know, one of the questions that I asked along the way, we've heard so much about teacher shortage, problems with retention of staff. And Barrow Elementary, smack dab in the middle of campus, doesn't have that problem because they have
Sure.
a college there that is training. But it was an absolutely amazing school. The opportunities for the college students to come in and do their practicums as well as their student teaching really afforded that school to really kind of see which teachers they would like to have.
Okay.
But a challenge that they were facing, and it was kind of interesting, was that many of their teachers within the district tried to get out to the suburbs. So that was a challenge they had. But one of their points of pride that was absolutely amazing, I mean, it was one of those aha moments, was their librarian. And they had, the school was I believe over 100 years old, just went underneath renovations.
Oh, wow.
But it's a gorgeous, historic, regal looking building. But they were able to remodel the library. And the media specialist that was employed there, just an incredible man. The coordination that I saw in their library with what is going on in the classrooms, the media specialist would meet quarterly with the teachers to see what programming he could plan for the kids during their time in the library to help support what is going on in the classroom. And he would design makerspace activities there.
Really?
Just a tremendously engaging library. And it just goes to show the level of integration that can occur within our schools.
You know, that's an interesting point, that there's a lot of opportunity, and you've seen it yourself, as you mentioned, where teachers come together and can work together to enhance those opportunities for students in every classroom. And I know one of the themes that I took away from the work that you were seeing and viewing in this trip was really that there's some tremendous things being done by teachers. I know there were schools where the teachers took more than just a classroom level lead in what was going on at the school level to create that culture, to create those opportunities. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about maybe some of the other points of pride that you saw principals bragging on, boasting on, where their teachers were taking a lead that went beyond the four walls of their classrooms.
Well, at Sugar Creek Elementary, and this is in Indiana, one of the truly unique items that I saw was they had created a district museum. Generally, artifacts within school districts are archived and you never see them.
Sure.
They're housed away, kind of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, right,
You know?
right.
But this school created a museum that was open to the public that housed the artifacts that are special to their district. The staff, retired teachers would come back in, and the students would assist as well. So again, they led me through it, and actually the principal was Dr. Mars. The retiree that was working there was actually her teacher in elementary school.
Really?
That was helped facilitating the museum that day.
So this is coming full circle, this program.
Totally full circle.
And it sounds like this is going beyond the typical trophy case that you might see as a nod to some of those things. This is really developing a more comprehensive way to showcase those pride points of the school and the legacy as well.
Well, they had cheerleading uniforms, scoreboards from outstanding seasons. They had just a tremendous old desks from an old desk from like the 1940s was there. So really, it was capturing not only the nostalgia of the district, but also the historical timeline.
Yeah. Wow. These are some great ideas, and I'm sure that our viewers have probably tons of questions about these things to follow up. And obviously there's so much to talk about that I'm sure you're eager to share. I would just again remind everybody who's taking a look at this today as they're checking it out that we do have a blog series on the Meemic website. If you go to meemic.com/roadtrip, you can follow in detail more of these adventures and see a lot more about the individual schools that Eric visited and be able to kind of connect there as well. But kind of shifting gears for just a moment, there was one story that really stood out to me, and I wanted to know if you could maybe take a moment to tell us a little bit about it. There was a school that's facing a really unique challenge that I know at this time many of our educators out there are facing this challenge to some degree or another, but the magnitude of this particular school facing this issue is what really stood out to me. And as a former principal, I can't even wrap my head around how they would go about addressing this need. And that was that they have, I read 71 different languages that are being spoken by about 4,000 students out of a population of 16,000 students. And so there were some really unique challenges they faced there, and I'm wondering if you could maybe highlight that story for us and maybe tell us a little bit about what you noticed when you were there.
You want to talk about just an absolute melting pot. Andre Korick is the principal at Clipton Elementary, and it's just outside of Indianapolis. It's actually in Perry Township schools. And when I arrived at the school, it was powerful. They were there waiting for me. One of their representatives from their central office was there, and actually Gary gave me a printout of the Perry Township School, and it outlines the data that these students are, like you had highlighted, about over 4,000 students are English language learners, and they do have some folks that offer support, but they said we need more. We just need more. Out of a population of 16,000, roughly 16,000 students in their school district. They're a higher poverty area, but they're doing wonderful things and building community. But some of the stories that were shared, the students aren't always coming from countries that they were political refugees, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and had seen some horrific events. So on top of the English language learning issue, they were also dealing with trauma. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I loved about it was the positivity of the school. Again, going back to the staff, the principal, they were pushing forward to make school let the students know that the school was a safe, good place to be. And when you came into their school, I don't know if I put it on the blog or not. I believe I did. You walk into the lobby, and from the book Wonder, they had a dry erase board, and it said, "I am a wonder." And then each of the students were able to put why they are a wonder. Now, like I said, it's a melting pot. And I remember one child said, "I helped my mom learn English." And how powerful is that? How absolutely powerful. And at the same time, there was another comment. The student said, I'm proud that I'm Chin, and going back to where they came from. So the diversity is absolutely incredible, and they're doing wonderful things. And their message was, again, we're doing great things, but we really need support as we work on integrating.
Absolutely. Yeah, and those are definitely difficult situations when you find yourself trying to do these awesome things for the students that you have with the resources you have, but you also find yourself up against maybe a need that isn't exactly met yet. And I'm noticing too that some of the schools you visited were able to find some really interesting opportunities to fund programs or opportunities for support and resources for their schools. There were particularly some that were doing, I believe it was environmental projects or something to that nature, where they were getting some federal funding that was helping them do things of that nature. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about some of those opportunities where maybe schools were getting creative about the way they funded the resources that they were using to help students.
Well, one of the things I think that schools have done a much better job in the last 15, 20 years is seeking those funding opportunities. So there is Summit Environmental School that is in part of the La Crosse public schools. And Summit Environmental is incredible. So if you cross the Mississippi from La Crosse to Minnesota side, there are a series of islands, and there's actually a school on one of those islands, and Summit Environmental. And they rebranded themselves about 5-6 years ago.
Okay.
And involving students in the design and layout of their campus. But the amazing thing is they've partnered with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, some of the local organizations. They do things like water quality testing, migratory birds. They as well raise food on their campus. So they're taking their very unique position where they are in the middle of the Mississippi and turning it into a learning opportunity for their students.
That's terrific. I just can't get enough of hearing about this, and I was so eager to hear from Eric himself, as I'm sure many of you were, as I was reading along and following on the blog and social media during this 2-week trip. And as you said, it's not over yet. That's of course true, and I would imagine that a trip like this is going to continue on into your tenure as president as well in a lot of different ways. But what a kickoff you've had.
Oh, it's been amazing.
You know, I guess there was one other thing that jumped out at me that I wanted to ask you about. There was a special author in one of the schools that you got to meet. And I know that many of us as educators have had a chance to have authors come into our school. Maybe we've had authors in our school in some way or another. But this one is probably one of the more unique authorships that any of us will run into. So maybe could you tell our viewers a little bit about this particular author and what they were doing?
So at Shirley Hills in this elementary, that's at Warner Robins, I did the tour of the building. As we went by a kindergarten room, they said, "You have to go in here." I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, last year a student wrote a book and illustrated the book, and it's published." And I said, "Well, how?" And the book was Barky the Mouse. And
Barky the Mouse.
And not that we're here for sales, but if you go on Amazon, you can find it on Amazon. Absolutely amazing story, because the students in the class assisted with the writing. This child did the illustrations, and now the child is in first grade. Mm-hmm. And the teacher showed me kind of a draft of the next story.
Book two in first grade.
The sequel. But here's the thing that was absolutely amazing about it. So other kids wanted to become a published author. So the bar had been raised, not by the teacher, but by a student, and it was done organically. And so these students are rallying together, supporting each other, and writing with a purpose. Absolutely mind-blowing. And the word was there was a local book signing.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
A local book signing, and this child had the longest line.
What do you think about that?
It's what we're about.
This is why we do the things we do, folks. I can't even tell you, and I'm sure that you know stories of this type, but there is no better inspiration for students to see their own potential than to see their peers being able to reach their own potential. There is no amount of saying, "You can be an author, Eric," that I could ever do as your teacher that would be as powerful as you seeing someone else who's able to do that, but not only a collaborative role. And I know you saw a ton of collaboration amongst students from things like STEAM rooms, STEM rooms, maker spaces, and terrific programs with one-to-one technology and opportunities for students to learn by doing and projects. What were some of the, I don't know, maybe highlights that you would say our schools, our viewers today could bring back to their schools if you had to say one step that they might be able to take to bring some of these kinds of opportunities for creation into their classrooms and into their schools? What did you take away that might be an action step?
So the 30,000-foot view for me, Gary, is that the qualities that all these schools had to be successful was relationships with each other, with their students, with their central office. Their central offices were all on board. Mm-hmm. And from the building administrator side, trust in their staffs, because collectively we're stronger together than we are individually. And that was the common characteristic that cut across all of the schools. So what I would share with the folks that are to leverage the collective knowledge and wisdom of those professionals and students, as in the case of Barkey, to move your schools forward, and community members as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. We are all in it together, and certainly administrators and school leaders can create that environment that allows for teachers to be able to do creative things and to be able to flourish and innovate. And then in turn, it sounds like what you're saying is then they create those opportunities for their students to do the same.
Absolutely.
So, you know, there's obviously so many things that we could talk about, but as much as we have great things going on, we know that, like we mentioned earlier, with the English language barrier and the trauma that some students are facing coming into our schools, there are real barriers that our schools are facing to being able to do the things that we would really like to be able to do, and in some cases, the things that we need to be able to do for our students. Would you have any advice for our viewers from what you've seen in terms of maybe opportunities that they could look to in their local areas for not only partnerships, but maybe funding sources? I know for me, one of the things that was really helpful when I was in the classroom is that the Meemic Foundation provides classroom grants, and that there are many different organizations out there doing these kinds of things. But what would you say maybe that you've learned were some creative ways that schools were trying to find funding and resources?
You know, one of the schools that I visited was Mary Todd Elementary, and that was in Lexington, Kentucky. And one of the game changers for their school, high poverty school, was taking care of the students as far as a clinic being on site that offered dental services, that offered medical services, that offered mental health support.
Oh, really?
And what a powerful opportunity. So, you know, my suggestion would be to reach for the stars. I mean, reach locally, but also look at state and federal grant possibilities that are out there. Barriers are opportunities.
It's a great one. Barriers are opportunities. You know, as we kind of think about as our time is coming to a close here, barriers are opportunities is maybe a great place for us to kind of land the plane on your epic adventure, at least in this set of in this part of the conversation. So you've had this opportunity to visit schools. I've had an opportunity to visit schools. Not everyone has the opportunity to visit schools. What is something that you would say to our viewers that they could do to be able to get a sense of the ideas from their surroundings, like you and I have had an opportunity by visiting these schools, that maybe doesn't take 2 weeks and thousands of miles or a big investment? How could we maybe learn from each other or take advantage of something that would give us a small flavor of the inspiration that we're talking about here today?
I have a couple of thoughts on that, Gary. One would be the best professional decision I've made in my career was to become involved with my state association. That you know, gives you that peer group that you can be in connection with as far as best practices. But now with the internet, I would encourage people that the best professional development, I've heard this across the nation as I've traveled, is the leveraging education chats across the nation, because it connects everybody and you can share. And that actually is an opportunity that is readily accessible.
And we're doing it here today. As you're seeing right now, this is a window into other classrooms, and you can certainly create something like that as well. Eric, it's been terrific to be able to talk with you and hear about your adventure. There's a bulldog in the room, so to speak. You may have heard of an elephant, but there's a bulldog in the room, and I'm wondering if you could tell us who's our friend here that's been hanging out during this time.
Well, this guy traveled all 4,400 miles with me. It was a rather interesting discussion at some of the toll booths. But however, this is a shout out that Meemic, NASP, and myself gave to my home school, Besser Elementary, with the Besser Bulldogs, and so I had a companion along the journey.
Well, that's terrific. And we really appreciate you being our companions today on Facebook Live. Again, thank you so much to Eric Cardwell, the new president of the National Association of Elementary School Principals. You can learn more about his epic adventure at meemic.com/roadtrip. And we want to thank you all for the work that you're doing each and every day for students. Just like we've talked about the great things happening in schools, that's what you're doing, and that's what we're doing, and that's why we're here. So thanks so much for joining us, and take care.
Thank you.